joining us today, and it's a pleasure to have you. This is, I think, an important day. We just had the new president of Argentina, Alberto Fernández, inaugurated and starts a new government, which I think all of us are very, very interested in. And of course, in 3 weeks from today, will mark the first year of presidency of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. And it's a good moment to not only look back at his first year in the presidency, but also to look forward at what we might expect over the next years. So this, I think, is a great opportunity to have a discussion exchange about both of these very, very significant South American countries. And we're delighted to be joined by a superb panel of experts who have agreed to share their thoughts. And first, let me start with Bruno Binete, who is a non-resident fellow here at the Inter-American Dialogue, now pursuing his doctorate at the London School of Economics, and was a professor at the Universidad Vitela in Buenos Aires. And it's great to have him with us as always. Ruti Amit is a professor at the Universidad de Vitela in Buenos Aires. She has written extensively on issues about the role of the military in Latin America, role of leadership, political leadership in Latin America, and we're very, very happy to have her with us. Monica de Boyer needs no introduction, but Monica is a professor at SAIS and also is a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. This is also Monica's birthday, so that shouldn't prevent you from asking hard questions. Don't go soft on her, even if it's her birthday. We're great to have Monica. And Matthias Spector, a great friend and associate professor at the Fundación Getúlio Vargas in Sao Paulo. Also, I think, the director of the program, International Relations, which is really fantastic. And congratulations, Matthias, for that. And thanks for being with us. And we're really thrilled to have as a moderator Rafael Mathus, who is the correspondent of Nación here in Washington, D.C. He writes a lot about U.S. politics, tries to explain it to Argentines. I wish he'd explain it to me. And also about U.S.-Argentina relations. And so Rafael has very graciously agreed to moderate this session, and let me turn it over to him.
Thank you, Michael, for that very kind introduction and for the invitation. It is my pleasure to be here with these very distinguished panelists to discuss two major countries in Latin America, two major partners who might go into a little bit of a hot period. From now on, we're going to try to keep it light and informal. We're going to switch from English to Espanol to Portuñol. My intention is to just kickstart this conversation, and then we'll take questions from the floor. So, as Michael was pointing out, Argentina has a new president. He was just sworn in this morning. Alberto Fernández assumes with many challenges ahead of him, including leading a very peculiar coalition with a former president, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, who is now his vice president. So we start with Argentina, then we'll switch to Brazil, and then we'll see where the two partners are heading into the future. Monica, since it's your birthday, what do you think is the main challenge Alberto Fernández is facing as president of Argentina?
Bueno, voy a empezar en inglés, después paso para portuñol. ¿Está bien? Sí. Okay. Entonces, the main challenge is debt. And Alberto Fernández this morning, when he was during his inauguration speech, he specifically spoke about that challenge, and he spoke about it in a very curious way. He said that Argentina really wants to pay its debt, but the problem is that it doesn't have the capacity to pay. And so he hinted strongly at what's coming, and what's coming in 2020 is evidently some kind of an attempt at restructuring, once again, Argentina's debt. Previously, during the campaign, Fernandez, but also echoed by others, including the new economy minister, Martín Guzmán, have been speaking about, doing a restructuring that was sort of modeled on or following from Uruguay's debt restructuring of 2003. I happen to have been very close to that particular restructuring because I was working at the International Monetary Fund at the time, and I was on the Uruguay mission. And the Uruguay restructuring, which really was incredibly successful, it was, an attempt at dealing with what constituted about 80% of the country's debt at the time. So for Uruguay, it was very important, but tellingly, it was a very small amount. We're talking about $5.5 billion in debt, which to our years today doesn't sound like anything. Argentina is looking at a financing gap of at least 6 times the amount of Uruguay's debt restructuring in 2020. So we're talking about 32 billion. So that in itself is already a challenge. And Uruguay had a very specific situation at the time because the reason for its crisis and its restructuring had directly to do with the crisis in Argentina in 2001. So the Uruguayans were very much able to sell their need for restructuring on the basis of contagion and on the basis of having suffered contagion from Argentina, which of course, made investors much more keen to help under those circumstances. But secondly, Uruguay had held an investment grade rating for a long time in the run-up to their crisis in 2002, 2003. And so what that did was, buy them a lot of investor goodwill because, of course, they had been a very well-behaved country for a very long period of time. But in addition to that, they were able to do a tricky thing with their restructuring operation. They were able to actually reprofile the debt without changing either the principal payment or the interest payments on the bonds that already existed, because those interest payments have been low, given that those bonds had been issued when Uruguay was investment grade. So for them, the only parameter they really had to change was the profile of the debt. And by keeping the interest rates, as they were before, they actually got themselves a haircut of about 15 to 20%, depending on how you calculate that haircut, and everything went swimmingly for them. It worked out really, really well. That is not a situation that can be replicated in Argentina because of, as I said before, the volumes of debt that we're talking about, which are much different. The fact that Argentina, unlike Uruguay, can't say that it's suffering from contagion. If anything, it's suffering from self-contagion because it keeps self-contaminating itself. And thirdly, this is again another default coming after a major one, or like restructuring potentially with a default coming after a major one that happened in 2001. And by the way, when we look at the history, the financial and economic history of Argentina, since 1975, Argentina has suffered at least 8 episodes of severe financial crises, some of which did involve defaults and restructurings and some of which did not. So it's a very complicated situation. It's a very complicated situation with the creditors and with the investors. And to top it all off, a large portion of the financing gap that they have next year, so the 32 billion that I was talking about, 20% of that is debt that's due to the IMF. And the IMF is not about to, well, at least that's not how the IMF operates. Fernandez had spoken before of trying to lengthen the maturity of the debt owed to the fund, but that's not how the IMF works. Like, the IMF does not extend maturities. At most, what the IMF would do is give Argentina a new program, and that's up in the air depending on the economic policies that the government implements. So those are the main challenges that I see.
Since you mentioned the D word, do you think it's realistic to come up with a plan to avoid default, or are we already there?
I think there's still a little bit of room for them to try to avoid default, but I'd say the probability of some kind of default is much, much higher than anything else. Now, does that mean that we're looking at a situation like 2001? No. But it does mean that there will be an event of default. Now, mind you, an event of default is any situation actually that involves a haircut, according to ratings agencies. So there doesn't necessarily have to be a stop in payments. But in any case, since we are looking at a haircut inevitably, I guess you can say we are looking at an event of default.
Bright start for the panel. Quería preguntarte, hay una pregunta que acá predomina en Washington, ¿no? Si es el gobierno de Fernández va a ser un gobierno moderado, el kirchnerismo tradicional, o si va a ser el kirchnerismo 2.0, sobre todo teniendo en cuenta que Cristina Kirchner parece haber dejado una impronta bastante fuerte de poder en el Congreso y también parte del gabinete, por ejemplo, con el regreso de Carlos Zanini, procurador del Tesoro. ¿Cómo lo ves?
Es hacer futurismo, porque en realidad no sabemos cómo va a ser. Me da la sensación que va... Me da la sensación que va a ser Alberto Fernández todo el intento de manejar una política moderada, y eso le va a traer tensiones seguramente con Cristina. Él va a tratar de apoyarse mucho en los gobernadores y en los intendentes que pueda apoyarse, pero no creo que tenga la visión de... O sea, él es más Néstor que Cristina. Él es muy parecido y él cree que Néstor hizo una muy buena política. O sea que va a ser mucho más cercano a la reconstrucción que intentó hacer Néstor con la baña, cosa que ahora no está. Pero además en un contexto diferente, porque por un lado no hay las commodities que tuvo Néstor para de alguna manera hacer una distribución rápida a los ingresos, sobre todo a los sectores más pobres, y con una oposición que, si bien digamos, tampoco sabe muy bien cómo va a jugar, es una oposición amplia que va a apoyar, que va a negociar y va a obligar a Alberto Fernández a negociar también. O sea que me da la sensación que esa va a ser la tendencia que él va a querer implantar. Por otro lado, queda la duda de cómo va a jugar Cristina. Algunos fantaseaban de que en pocos meses Alberto podría ser otro tío Cámpora y dejarle el gobierno a Cristina. Yo creo que eso no va a pasar. Cristina tiene un nivel de rechazo muy alto. Pero sí me parece que si él empieza a tomar algunas decisiones que están fuera del foco de lo que Cristina considera mejor o beneficioso para el país, va a haber tensiones.
¿Qué rol ves para Cristina Kirchner o qué rol la ves adoptando ella? ¿Crees que va a tratar de interferir mucho, que le va a dejar margen al principio para hacer lo que él haga y ver cómo se manejan esas tensiones a futuro?
Me imagino, porque no tengo datos, que le va a dejar espacio. Ella va a tener muchísimo control sobre el Congreso, las dos cámaras, va a tener mucho control sobre la provincia de Buenos Aires, que es un bastión muy importante del discurso y la retórica peronista tradicional de Cristina. En la medida que Alberto no se aleje demasiado, como pasó un poco con los nombramientos, ¿no? Ella de alguna manera va a tratar de corregir algunos puntos, pero no creo que sea inicialmente alguien que va a interferir en, por lo menos, la propuesta que vaya a llevar adelante Alberto. Creo que ella además conoce las diferencias con Alberto.
Bruno, quería hacerte otra consulta respecto también de la Argentina. Uno de los temas que han surgido, una de las novedades que dejó la elección es que por primera vez hay dos coaliciones, ¿no? Una coalición en el poder, que es el Frente de Todos, y una coalición en la oposición. ¿Es un avance esto? ¿Argentina es un nuevo escenario político que marca más madurez democrática, por decirlo así?
Sí, sobre todo en términos comparativos, ¿no? La imagen que tuvimos hoy de un traspaso de un gobierno de un signo político a un gobierno de un signo político distinto es poco común para Argentina, y en el contexto latinoamericano nos hace Suiza prácticamente, ¿no? Por cuando vemos la realidad regional. Hubo de hecho una misa el otro día donde también compartieron tanto Fernández como Macri, estuvieron al lado, etcétera. Parece haber algo de orgullo, digamos, y Fernández hizo bastante hincapié en esto en su discurso también. Es cierto que la derrota de Macri fue leída, por lo menos por Macri, como una derrota digna, ¿no? Todos sabemos que en las elecciones primarias, que en Argentina no son verdaderamente primarias, sino una encuesta grande pagada por el Estado, perdió por, ¿qué había dicho? 18 puntos, una bestialidad, y en la elección general la perdió solamente por 8. Sigue siendo una derrota estrepitosa, pero menos humillante que la anterior. Y eso, cree Macri, le da capital político para ser el coordinador, dijo él, no el líder, sino el coordinador, no sé qué diferencia hay, de la oposición a Alberto Fernández. Creo que es prematuro, creo que esos 40% de los votos no son de Macri, no, él no es el dueño de esos votos. Creo que además esa coalición opositora todavía tiene que, lo que decimos en Argentina, el pase de facturas por la derrota. La Unión Cívica Radical, que es el partido más antiguo de Argentina, que tiene, a diferencia del partido de Macri, que ahora solamente gobierna en la ciudad de Buenos Aires, tiene 3 gobernaciones, tiene una presencia importante en el Congreso y tiene, creo, el derecho a decir, mira, Macri sí, pero no, este rol de coordinador, líder o lo que sea, no va, ¿no? Hay gente, incluso el saliente presidente de la Cámara de Diputados, Emilio Monzó, que siempre insistió que la coalición tenía que ampliarse e intentar cooptar parte del peronismo, también quiere cobrarse lo que él cree que se le fue negado por Macri, con lo cual hay mucho. Está Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, que es el nuevo jefe de gobierno, el reelecto jefe de gobierno de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires, con aspiraciones presidenciales. Es importante, es un sistema político más balanceado. Podría ser que después de la atomización del sistema de partidos que sucedió en 2001, tenemos un sistema político con indicios de estabilidad. De hecho, estos dos frentes, bueno, son coaliciones los dos, una experiencia bastante única para la Argentina, vienen sobreviviendo. Parece que la coalición Juntos por el Cambio de Macri tiene la intención por lo menos de permanecer unida en el Congreso, con lo cual sí, es auspicioso, pero todavía falta mucho para hablar de un sistema, por ejemplo, bipartidista o bicoalicionista.
Por lo que decías, además, Ruti, los liderazgos en esa coalición todavía son bastante fluidos, ¿no? Creo que por lo menos parecen ser bastante fluidos, ¿no?
Vos decís la coalición de...
Tanto en Cambiemos como, bueno, también en el oficialismo, en el frente de...
A ver, la experiencia del peronismo es que en general se terminan alineando con el presidente. Y pienso que digamos, del lado de la coalición de gobierno va a ser más fácil el alineamiento. Me parece que la oposición tiene fracturas más fuertes y Macri no tiene, digamos, el apoyo general o total de la coalición que supuestamente quedó en la oposición. Pero me parece que esa coalición es mucho más frágil, puede desmembrarse, al mismo tiempo que hay sectores de radicalismo, o sea, ya hay diputados del Cambiemos que se están yendo, y el radicalismo está también muy dividido entre los que creen que la única opción es mantenerse cerca de Macri o cerca del PRO, y los que creen que en realidad es el momento de recuperar cierto poder propio. Y en esa, bueno, división, digamos, yo creo que el radicalismo pesa mucho. Pero quería hacer también un comentario, si me permitís, sobre los desafíos, porque, bueno, yo no soy economista, no estuve en el Fondo Monetario, sé que acá en Estados Unidos se interesa mucho más ese tema, pero me parece que un desafío central de Alberto pasa por ponerle plata en el bolsillo a la gente. Y ese creo que a nivel de lo que se piensa en Argentina y lo que se espera en Argentina va a ser el desafío más grande. Si él puede en poco tiempo, en un corto plazo, mejorar la situación de ese 40% de pobres que hoy tenemos.
Con el desafío, ¿no?, de todas las restricciones que se encuentran en el gobierno, ¿no? Matías, dos preguntas. La primera, si agarrándome lo que dijo Bruno, ¿no? Si Brasil y la Argentina hoy, in the middle of a very, volatile region, ¿no?, parecen ser como dos excepciones en las protestas en Chile, en Bolivia, ¿no? ¿Son dos ticking bombs o son realmente dos oasis de estabilidad?
Right, thank you. Great. So, a year ago, I think it was, 12 months ago, we met here, and the big questions about Brazil were, can Bolsonaro govern? And if he manages to govern, is he a threat to democracy? And I think this goes, if we manage to answer that, then we can begin to understand whether this is a ticking box, and then we can do the same for Argentina. I think the answers to the two questions are both yeses, right? Can he govern? Yes. it was a question mark, because after all, Bolsonaro got elected on a ticket that promised to change the way Brazilian politics operated. In the aftermath of a big implosion well, not a big implosion, but in the aftermath of the Lava Jato revelations, which showed the degree to which endemic corruption was the chief source for political campaigns in the land, and the degree to which there was collusion between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary to produce illicit funds to pay for political campaigns. He has managed to govern, and relatively successfully. He polls something between 35 and 42%, which is fairly good, given the Brazilian standard in the last few years. He's managed to pass a very ambitious, the most ambitious, pension reform Brazil's confronted in the last 4 decades since transitioning to democracy. And the reason why he's managed to do that, I think, is two. First of all, Bolsonaro is today the most successful political communicator in Brazil. Very good on messaging and very effective at sticking to his message. And he got elected on this message, which is the fight against corruption, security, and turning the economy around. On the fight against corruption, the minute he took office, a corruption scandal broke out in his own family. And he's managed to become Teflon thus far. Will we see that moving forward? I don't know, but thus far, it's not tainted him in any significant way. On the economy, I'll let Monica tell us all about it, but there has been progress in reforms, and there is a sense that the economy, after many years of recession and then paralysis, is beginning to pick up. And if you talk to people who look at the Brazilian economy, the optimism is just, I think Monica would agree with me, exaggerated, a bit crazy, but there is a lot of optimism, which we haven't seen for a while. And then on the issue of security, for reasons that have nothing to do with Bolsonaro himself, have nothing to do with his policies, the fact is that crime statistics are going down for reforms that took place before Bolsonaro and all sorts of changes in the way the political economy of policing happens in Brazil's big cities. But the second reason is that for a long time now, since Dilma, Congress took a role that had never taken. Congress became far more powerful in Brazil in the last 5 years. And Congress is in reformist mode. The Speaker of the House, who has his own political ambitions, has a very clear idea of where he wants to take the country to, which is reform, and they've been managing to charge forward. How sustainable this is moving forward, again, I don't know, but thus far, Bolsonaro seems to be doing pretty okay. The opposition is not articulated in any way or form. The ability of the opposition to block the agenda is very limited.
So, let me just elaborate that. You think the liberation of Lula is not going to change that?
Lula coming out of prison helps Bolsonaro because rejection rates for Lula are super high, far higher than for Bolsonaro, because the Lula that came out of prison is not the Lula of 2002, the moderate Lula, the Lula that seeks the center, the Lula that is happy with economic reforms to open up the Brazilian economy. Is a Lula back to basics. He's pre-2002, he's unreconstructed, and rightly so, because he needs to polarize with Bolsonaro with a view to the municipal elections of October next year. But I think it facilitates life for Bolsonaro, because remember, the reason why Bolsonaro managed to get elected is because he could embody the anti-PT sentiment in the country, which is the dominant sentiment politically to this day. Now, this may change moving forward, but as of now, that's what we get.
So, economy's up, crime is down, Lula is out, reforms are keep coming in.
And yet the news are bad, because to the answer to the question, does Bolsonaro represent a threat to democracy? The answer is it's an unchallengeable yes.
Monica, you wanna?
I agree with that last part.
What about the first part?
So let's start with, whether or not we can really view Bolsonaro as being responsible for much of what has happened. You said something with which I agree, and which is the role of Congress and what Congress, what Congress has become over these past few years. And we have to mention somebody's name here, and that's the Speaker of the House, Rodrigo Maia, who is really the guy who pushed this pension reform across the finish line, because we know that Bolsonaro was never, ever very inclined to defend pension reform. It's in his history. He, in the past, has voted against it. He didn't really stand behind it. So it was essentially the economy minister, Paulo Guedes, working side by side with Rodrigo Maia, and Maia, knowledgeable of, this being a reform that the country's needed. And by the way, we've been discussing pension reform for the past 30 years. So, at some point it had to happen. It ended up happening. And it ended up happening with the leadership of Rodrigo Maia than with any kind of semblance of leadership by Bolsonaro. So that's how I view that particular reform having happened and that particular reform having made it across the finish line. As for what we have in terms of the economic outlook and the current situation right now, the current situation isn't good because, this is an economy that suffered a major recession in 2015 and 2016. It then started recovering in 2017, but it's growing at 1%. And we just had third quarter GDP figures released. Nobody was expecting things to really bump up very much, but what we found in that GDP release is that the economy is stuck at 1%. And there really isn't anything at all when you look sort of, out into the drivers of growth in Brazil. There isn't anything obvious that's going to generate growth that's much higher than that. So, at the moment, if you look at, for example, household consumption is being kept in check because you have a very high unemployment rate still. It's coming down, but it's coming down at the expense of rising labor market informality. So there's a rising sense of economic insecurity, and this goes back to your point about Fernandez's challenges. So in a sense, there's a similarity between Brazil and Argentina here in terms of the point of where they are, because these are two countries that had seen, for better or worse, Brazil more than Argentina, but had seen some advances in social mobility recently, and now these trends have reversed. In Brazil, extreme poverty is up by 50%, and these figures for the labor market, when you look at them in depth, they give you a very clear story of economic insecurity, despite anything else that anybody else might say. So the underpinnings for consumption coming back are not there. When we look at investment, of course, Brazil is a big economy, and there are sectors which are going to thrive and grow, and there are sectors which are not going to thrive and grow. What matters is, on aggregate, what is going to happen. Well, the story that we have is a story where here's a country that's managed to bring down nominal interest rates by a lot. So nominal interest rates came down from 14% back in 2015, 2016, all the way to 5%. This is the lowest historical level for the nominal exchange rate. And the real exchange rate is very low too, not because of rising inflation, which used to be the case in the past, but rather because nominal interest rates have come down, which is exactly how you want real interest rates to come down. And yet, this has failed to ignite investment. This has failed to spur investment. So we're not seeing investment coming back. We're seeing it, sort of in a very patchy way in these sectors which are a little bit more dynamic, but it isn't really there. And I think the oil auction that was, the government tried to sort of sell it as a success, but it was really somewhat of a failure, underscores that to a very large extent. The main participant in that oil auction was China, and international investors are really staying out of the Brazilian game because of all of these uncertainties. So the economy is in a really difficult spot, which has political ramifications, because we're going to complete Bolsonaro's 1 year in office, and I think up to this point, the Brazilian people have given him the benefit of the doubt. there's still a lot of economists in the country who believe in the confidence fairy. You know, you do stuff and then, you know, confidence comes back and then growth comes back.
Rings a bell.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't quite work that way. You know, it would have been nice if it did, but if anything, if we can take anything away from the past few years, is that that's not really how it works. And you're looking into a scenario in 2020 where, coupled with municipal elections, you also have, you know, a sort of external environment that is not very conducive to optimism. You know, there are going to be elections in the U.S., which are going to be highly contested. There's still the U.S.-China trade war, and we're going to talk about that later, I know, and how that's impacting countries in the region. There are a number of issues, a number of problems on the external front, which are going to be headwinds for Brazil.
Since you mentioned, you know, the external front, tengo una pregunta para los cuatro, ¿no? Quiero que se extiendan y comenten ampliamente sobre este tema que me parece muy interesante. No recuerdo otra vez que Argentina y Brasil han tenido dos presidentes que básicamente que no simpatizan el uno con el otro para nada, se han hecho cosas bastante fuertes, ¿no? Y hay un riesgo palpable, latente si se quiere, de que el MERCOSUR, el intento de crear una integración económica entre los dos gigantes de América del Sur, explote por los oídos. ¿Qué va a pasar con esto? ¿Qué creen que va a pasar con esta relación entre dos hermanos en América Latina? Bruno, ¿quieres arrancar vos?
¿Se escucha? Sí. A ver, algo de optimismo dentro de un marco pesimista. No veo margen para una ruptura del MERCOSUR. ¿Por qué? Porque nuestras industrias son, y en esto hablo tanto de Brasil como de Argentina, industrias tan poco competitivas en el mundo que si no nos vendemos entre nosotros, no le vendemos a nadie. ¿Sí? Y en ese sentido, esa mediocridad es lo que nos obliga a entendernos.
No nos une el amor, sino el espanto.
Exactamente. Nos une que nuestros autos, nuestras heladeras, nuestros televisores no los compra nadie porque son carísimos y malísimos. Entonces, no hay otra. A eso el primero en saberlo, en entenderlo, fue Alberto Fernández, que muy rápidamente bajó el tono con respecto a Bolsonaro y dijo, bueno, más allá de cómo nos llevemos, llamó a Alberto Fernández a Daniel Scioli como embajador en Brasil. Si hay una persona con, digamos, convicciones flexibles, es Daniel Scioli, que va a estar en Brasilia intentando articular, digamos, la relación, y probablemente lo va a hacer. Y Bolsonaro parece ser el último en entenderlo, o se lo hicieron entender cuando decidió a último momento, ultimísimo momento, mandar a su vicepresidente a Buenos Aires para la asunción de Fernández. Entonces, dentro de ese panorama, creo que hay poco margen para que ninguno de los dos tome decisiones drásticas. Si esto implica que el MERCOSUR va a seguir siendo un mecanismo defensivo, y sí, probablemente sí, pero recordemos que también la gran apuesta de apertura del MERCOSUR, cuando sí hubo afinidad, que fue el acuerdo con la Unión Europea, si no se logró o si no siguió avanzando, no fue solamente por el MERCOSUR, sino también porque, no me acuerdo dónde lo leí el otro día, somos competitivos en un área en la que el mundo suele ser proteccionista, ¿no? Y entonces también el contexto internacional, no es que el contexto internacional dice véndanos por favor sus cosas, ¿no? Entonces creo que todo esto, que podría ser deprimente, al mismo tiempo implica que estamos obligados a entendernos.
Si uno mira en el largo plazo, el MERCOSUR ha tenido varios momentos de cierto éxito y de mucho retraso y hasta paralización. O sea que este es un contexto muy diferente y en ninguno de esos procesos se decidió romper el MERCOSUR. Por lo cual mi expectativa es que ahora tampoco suceda, o sea que va a ser difícil recomponerlo. En realidad, creo que el momento más crítico fue durante el gobierno de Cristina, cuando primaba un poco la visión de Hugo Chávez de que el MERCOSUR era un acuerdo neoliberal y que por lo tanto había que buscar otra forma de vinculación, y sin embargo sobrevivió. Lo retomó Macri cuando asume, sobre todo cuando Malcorra era su canciller, y de alguna manera eso permitió ir buscando nuevos mercados y fortalecer de nuevo la relación con la Unión Europea. La Unión Europea no nos va a dar mucha apertura en los países, sobre todo yo creo que el país más difícil en este momento es Alemania, que no tiene ningún interés en darle apertura, y por lo tanto ahí reafirmo un poco lo que decía Bruno, va a quedar más como un mecanismo bilateral que de acuerdo a la influencia que pueda tener a nivel global. Por otro lado, está el tema de que históricamente los otros socios externos o los socios con los que nos quisimos vincular siempre preguntaban, ¿usted habla por Brasil o por el MERCOSUR? Y Brasil ha tenido históricamente una política unilateral para tomar decisiones con los socios, digamos, estables o no estables o informales, con los que se iba vinculando de alguna manera. Y no creo que ahora sea muy diferente, pero Argentina está mucho más atada a cuidar el MERCOSUR de lo que necesita Brasil, y Brasil siempre ha jugado de forma individual, por lo tanto no creo que esto sea un rompimiento, va a ser lo mismo que siempre hubo.
Yo estoy largamente de acuerdo y veo así, de nuevo para hablar de él, una persona importante en esto todo ha sido Rodrigo Maia, porque él ha visitado Argentina un poco antes, bueno, de hoy, y ha estado para conocer y hablar con Fernández y felicitarlo y todo eso. Entonces, seguimos con este modelo en que Bolsonaro puede a cualquier momento, porque es así que lo hace, va al Twitter, hace un tweet que es así un poco, puede ser mal visto en Argentina, pero hay gente por detrás intentando mantener las relaciones más o menos intactas. Y así lo veo. Así lo veo.
Los colegas fueron del optimismo al moderado optimismo, entonces yo voy a ir al moderado pesimismo. La relación bilateral Brasil-Argentina está mal hace muchos años. Ya era muy mala al final del gobierno Lula, fue relativamente mala durante todo el periodo Dilma Rousseff, muchas diferencias entre los dos países y una percepción muy clara en la Argentina de que Brasil se corta solo, de que el proyecto internacional de Brasil no pasa más por el cono sur, que tiene que ver con los BRICS, que tiene que ver con el G20, con IVAs, con un juego que es global, con la reforma del Consejo de Seguridad, no con Argentina. Y del lado argentino, algo parecido. Macri, el proyecto internacional de Macri no pasaba por Brasil. De la misma manera que ahora Alberto Fernández tampoco tiene una concepción de la relación con Brasil que sea central. Es otra cosa, su relación con México, ahora con el Grupo de Puebla, la L de Lula libre, en una provocación directa al bolsonarismo, que por lo tanto reacciona como reacciona. Y si aunque sea verdad lo que Bruno dice, es verdad que el MERCOSUR ya hace mucho tiempo es un escudo proteccionista, y que la manera de explicar la sobrevivencia de MERCOSUR, aunque sea moribundo, pero ¿por qué sigue viviendo? Vive porque grupos proteccionistas en ambos países, y sobre todo los gobernadores de las provincias de San Pablo y de Córdoba, pueden capturar ese pedazo de policy y mantener un MERCOSUR proteccionista vivo. Eso es verdad. Pero también es verdad que hay un impulso del lado brasileño de apertura económica y que hay un disgusto fundamental de lo que representa la Argentina de Fernández. Recuerden que el canciller brasileño se refiere a Fernández como una muñeca rusa, como una mamushka, que cuando se abre aparece Cristina, y cuando se abre aparece Chávez, y cuando se abre aparece Fidel Castro. Y esto que parece muy estúpido, porque lo es, captura la imaginación, y a mí no me sorprendería, no sé si Mónica está de acuerdo, a mí no me sorprendería que Bolsonaro un día diga, estamos saliendo de MERCOSUR. De hecho, no saldrá, habrá acuerdos, y Argentina vendrá corriendo pidiendo por favor que Brasil no salga corriendo, pero nominalmente podrá decirse que se terminó el MERCOSUR. El canciller brasileño dirá algunos exabruptos. Ese juego para mí que es muy peligroso, es jugar con fuego. pero no me sorprende. Y lo que a mí realmente me preocupa no es esto, porque Bolsonaro va a pasar como Fernández va a pasar, pero hay algo más profundo. En los últimos 40 años de democracia en la región, grandes políticos argentinos y grandes políticos brasileños se conocían y se frecuentaban. Raúl Alfonsín fue a la pose de los gobernadores brasileños elegidos en la primera elección democrática en 1982. Los conocía por nombre, la generación de Cardoso. Eso hoy no existe. El otro día me di el trabajo de hablar con lo que es los políticos de la renovación brasileña, jóvenes políticos, ¿no? Que están en sus primeros puestos. La mayoría nunca fue a la Argentina. Ninguno sabe nombrar una contraparte argentina de su misma edad. Y del lado argentino algo parecido. Hoy a la mañana tuve una situación tremenda. Hablé con una persona en Buenos Aires que me dio la siguiente teoría, que es una teoría que circula en el nuevo gobierno argentino. Que no hay que preocuparse tanto con Bolsonaro, porque Bolsonaro no va a durar.
No.
Qué bueno, porque
Ahora, me da la sensación, no sé si ustedes creen que la caída del Mercosur sería algo malo.
Yo lo diría desde un punto de vista político, no económico. Digamos, el Mercosur nace por un problema de seguridad y no un problema económico. Nace para, de alguna manera, una propuesta argentina para que de alguna manera se pudiera aquietar la posibilidad de un conflicto con Brasil mientras teníamos un conflicto importante con Chile. Nace con los temas nucleares. Y lo único que tenía para ofrecer a Argentina en ese momento y que a Brasil le interesaba era justamente apertura y control de un dominio que Argentina era superior al de Brasil, que era el dominio nuclear. Después se le fueron agregando otros componentes económicos, pero es interesante recordar que antes del Mercosur, como llamado Mercosur, apareció el Mercosur de la defensa. O sea que los militares, en la posibilidad de verse excluidos de acuerdos con Brasil, que todavía seguía siendo un hipotético punto de conflicto, hicieron un Mercosur propio. Entonces, me parece que tiene un contenido político fuera de lo económico que va a perdurar. Y como pasa por ahí con otros organismos, aunque no tenga una fortaleza como se esperaba en algún momento, va a continuar.
Vamos a meter al presidente de Estados Unidos en la discusión, Donald Trump, que fue noticia hace poco al reimplementar aranceles al acero y al aluminio a Brasil y a la Argentina. Todavía se tiene que formalizar, pero bueno, en Estados Unidos de hoy un tuit basta. ¿Cómo ven ese vínculo y cómo creen que Trump puede jugar en los realineamientos que se están viendo en la región? Matías. Bueno, perdón. Mónica, quita el micrófono derecho.
Iba a decir que ahí entra claramente la cuestión de China, ¿no? Porque yo tengo algunas tesis sobre este anuncio de Trump respecto a los aranceles de acero y aluminio. Y una de ellas está relacionada en directo con la guerra comercial entre Estados Unidos y China. Entonces, lo que pasa es que lo que se ve es que Argentina y Brasil y otros países de América Latina están hoy muy involucrados con China en todas las áreas, no solo en la área de comercio, pero en la área de inversiones, en todo. Y esta realización, junto con la percepción de que la guerra comercial ha generado un desvío natural de comercio de China en los temas de productos agrícolas para la región, en particular para Brasil y Argentina, eso es algo que no ha escapado Trump. Entonces, uno de los motivos para este resurgimiento de los aranceles en acero y aluminio puede ser una forma de presionar Brasil y Argentina para que no venda más tantos productos agrícolas a China y que entonces pasen a dejar un espacio mayor para los productores agrícolas norteamericanos. Y si así es, eso coloca a los países en una posición muy complicada, porque tanto Brasil cuanto Argentina hoy necesitan de China. Sí necesitan de los Estados Unidos, pero necesitan muchísimo de China. sobre todo en los temas de inversiones. Entonces, las acciones de Trump y las acciones de Trump que imagino aún vamos a ver al frente, pueden tener implicaciones muy grandes, pero no necesariamente generar divergencias entre Brasil y Argentina, porque los dos necesitan de China.
Ruth, ¿vos pensás que la Argentina necesita más a China que a Estados Unidos? Porque una de las cosas que se suele decir en la Argentina es que la Argentina necesita a Estados Unidos justamente para arreglar el problema de la deuda, ¿no? Esto que Mónica plantea como uno de los principales desafíos.
Xi Jinping dijo que Obor o la ruta de la seda se extiende hasta América Latina. Y creo que ha sido más fácil venderle productos a China que vender obviamente a Estados Unidos. Yo no estoy en temas de economía, o sea que no tengo mucha idea de exactamente cómo es el caudal de exportaciones que Argentina tiene con Estados Unidos, pero también me parece que es importante tener presente que pese a que el discurso chino es sobre comercio, tienen intereses políticos, tienen intereses militares y bueno, claramente en el caso de Argentina está este tema de supuestamente la base satelital, que además es secreta y en donde trabajan Fuerzas Armadas China. Entonces me parece que China está haciendo una penetración muy fuerte en toda América Latina, muy sutil, no juega esa presión directa que conocemos de Estados Unidos, pero que sí de alguna manera favorece también áreas de desarrollo que Estados Unidos nunca le interesó desarrollar.
Complementando lo que decía Ruth, curiosamente en el último tiempo, China es el segundo socio comercial de la Argentina después de Brasil, pero es más que nada por las importaciones nuestras de productos chinos, porque las exportaciones nuestras a China bajaron bastante. Y de hecho los montos no son muy distintos entre lo que Argentina exporta a Estados Unidos y lo que le exporta a China. El tema es que son sectores distintos. Nuestras exportaciones a Estados Unidos están mucho más diversificadas, son bastante más sofisticadas, por eso lo de las tarifas de Trump nos pega, que lo que le exportamos a China. Entonces en ese sentido, y supongo que será algo parecido tal vez con Brasil, necesitamos a los dos. Por esto esta situación de la guerra comercial a corto plazo nos da beneficios y a largo, si esto se mantiene, y sobre todo si Trump no es solamente Trump, porque Trump, bueno, es un tuit y su, creo, por lo que entiendo, su manejo de los temas es bastante superficial, pero el tema es la gente que lo está asesorando a Trump y el tema es la gente del Departamento de Estado, del Departamento de Defensa, etcétera, que va a continuar después de Trump. Si el interés del gobierno estadounidense es presionar a América Latina y a nuestros países en particular a una elección, digamos, a quién querés más, a mamá o papá, tenemos un problema gravísimo de largo plazo que no tengo idea de cómo podemos solucionar.
Tampoco parece que haya una estrategia muy clara por parte de Estados Unidos respecto de cómo hacer para desplazar o contrarrestar la creciente influencia de China en América Latina, sobre todo porque no tienen la plata para salir a pelear de igual a igual con China. Así es.
And I'd go as far as saying on the contrary, right? Because if you remember a year ago, we all thought Bolsonaro campaigned on the notion that he would align to the United States, he would cap Chinese influence. He made it a point on the campaign trail to visit Taiwan. He took his 3 children who were elected officials, and that's what we thought. And then in the first month of the administration, it was very clear that constituencies inside Brazil would block that movement because these are export interests that need to keep the relationship with China alive and kicking. But then the bizarre thing that happened is that the Trump administration kept sending all the wrong signals. Bolsonaro was willing to give love, but he found nothing on the other side but a wall. And what's effectively happened in the last 3 months, if you go to Brazil, is really quite astounding. Because now there is consensus that China is actually the best we can do. Because the United States is not going to deliver. And that turn of events, I think, is very telling because it shows the degree to which the ascent of China in Latin America, if you want, is going to create trouble in US-Latin America relations. It of course creates division within the countries. You now have pro-China and anti-China constituencies all over the place. You will have divisions among Latin American countries. I don't think for a minute that Brazil and Argentina have even begun to consider putting together a coalition to deal with China. I don't think the embassies in Beijing operate that way or think of the relationship that way. But what we do know now is that conflict between the US and China and Latin America will be all the rage. And the inability in this town of signaling correctly is really something I struggle to understand.
I wanted to just make a couple of comments picking up on things that were said and some of the things you said. So from the Brazilian side, you know, the announcement that, you know, these tariffs were going to be reimposed on Brazil after everything that's happened, I think illustrates largely what Brazilian foreign policy has become. I mean, Brazilian foreign policy now is sort of like, okay, we work with countries because they're our friends. But countries are not friends. Countries have interests. And I think what has become very clear in this latest round with Trump and his tariffs is that Trump is speaking of U.S. interests, and he's speaking of, you know, in particular, a constituency, the constituency of farmers and agricultural producers, and how they're being impacted by these relations between China and Brazil and Argentina. So, you know, this is something I think that this administration in Brazil is still going to struggle with, and it's going to struggle with that going forward, because picking up on things that were said before, regardless of who's in the White House next year, the fact is that China will remain, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, China is now sort of the opposing force to the US in many respects. And that isn't going away. And since that isn't going away, I completely agree with your point that in the long term, because Brazil and Argentina can't choose sides, they're going to have a lot of problems, because they will be pressured time and again, whether it be by the US or by China, which hasn't yet happened but could, they will be pressured to pick a side, and they can't do it.
Is there a possibility that both countries could like reap benefits from, you know, trying to be in a way cortejados, no, by both China and the US, or that is not?
They have no leverage.
Nada.
They have no leverage, but there's something more perverse to that, at least on the Brazilian side. There is this fantasy that back in the 1940s, Brazil could manipulate Roosevelt and Hitler, and that cleverly Brazil, by not picking sides, could actually reap lots of benefits. Now, go to the diplomatic archives, open them, and you'll see that that's not the story at all. Brazil, very serious forces pushed Brazil into a war. And Monica is absolutely right, Bruno is absolutely right. It's going to be a hard time for Brazil and for Argentina, because when the system is polarized, not picking sides is virtually impossible unless you have a lot of leverage, which we, as Monica says correctly, we don't.
So why not just pick China?
Well, I think in the case of Argentina, correct me if I mean, you have a very good point as to, you know, the way that exports go to one place and another. So the composition of exports matters. But to be quite honest, you know, I think at the end of the day, given China's push into Latin America, and given that they do have a strategy differently from the US, a very well-financed one and a very well-structured one, because, you know, I mean, I've had over the years a number of students and size, Chinese ones, who speak fluent Spanish and Portuguese, you know, and who have worked in the region, are knowledgeable about the region, and so on. So, you know, there's a long-term strategy here that China has, and ultimately, you know, for the countries that need external financing the most, and at the moment comparing Brazil and Argentina, that country's Argentina, if there comes a point where, you know, sides need to be picked, I can't really see the US being picked, because the game is with China. With Brazil, it's a bit more complicated, because of course we currently has a government that has, you know, sort of staked its foreign policy on trying to come up with some kind of big achievement in Brazil-US relations. But to be quite honest, it's not going to happen. So ultimately, I think Brazil is pretty much going to find itself in a similar situation. You know, where is it going to be getting its investment flows from? Where is it going to be getting, you know, a lot of the funds and other resources that it needs from? Where is it going to be tapping into new markets? It's all about China.
Bruno, China, como opción.
What I would say is we can pick China as soon as we stop taking money from the IMF, which is it's not gonna, yeah, exactly. Still, the influence of the United States in multilateral finance institutions is what keeps Argentina looking towards Washington, in addition to our exports, of course. So why do we keep, I mean, it was interesting because I was talking to a Chilean official the other day, and he said, well, I mean, the US is not that much of an issue. I don't even travel to Washington anymore. Well, our finance minister has to, because it's here. And the Trump administration was crucial in kind of pushing for Argentina to get that money, and we're going to need them again to kind of renegotiate that. China, so far, doesn't have an alternative to that. It's building one, you can say, but it's mostly based on investment, not on mobilizing kind of that type of money to cover a finance gap. That's the one we have. It's a $57 billion program we have with the IMF. So if we, I don't know, go to rehab and manage how to function without taking money from the IMF, sure, then maybe China will gain much more influence. So far, we haven't been that successful.
Sí,
Una cosa que me parece que se puede agregar es que rápidamente y antes de asumir, Alberto Fernández nombró embajador en Washington. Y además se nombró un embajador que casi era el canciller. No nombró a nadie para China, en donde había un embajador político.
Yes.
I just wanted to highlight this because there's a danger of this conversation ending up with us all concluding that, you know, the drift for Brazil and Argentina towards China is inevitable and it's what's coming, which is fair enough. But then at what point will the United States react? And I think it's very clear now, at least from the way people talking this down, the minute security issues come to the agenda, then the game will change. One thing is the drift because of the investment and trade and the, you know, growing economic interdependence. But the minute security issues come to the fore, then it's a different conversation altogether. And that's what worries me so much, because the bilateral Argentine-Brazilian relationship on security is not in good footing. And I don't just mean, you know, geostrategy. I mean the everyday practice of security. There's a big change going on now in the region, and this is a new phenomenon. It's 5 to 10 years old, and it's the transformation of Brazil into a major exporter of narcotics, right? If you look at the UN reports on drugs, you will see there's been a diversion of trade. The single largest ports of cocaine export now in South America are no longer in Colombia or Peru. They're all three in Brazil, in 3 different Brazilian states. This has generated a corridor of criminality within Brazil that is massive. We now know that organized crime elects politicians, not only at the local level, but also at the federal level. In other words, there's a Brazil growing now that resembles Mexico more than we thought. And why is that so important for the relationship with Argentina? Because for whoever is the governor of the province of Buenos Aires, the border, and in particular the illegal weapons trade at the border zone, is so critical. When President Macri went to Brasilia to meet President Temer, the one thing he asked was, can Brazil help us deal with the border? And the Temer administration could not respond. Macri insisted. The Temer administration did not respond, so Macri leaked a letter he sent to Temer, to the press, to try and put pressure, which of course did not work. That situation there is new, is highly problematic, It's not the terms of the conversation in the bilateral relationship. And it's the kind of stuff that ends up dragging the United States into the region, but in the most unhelpful ways. So you talked about ticking bombs.
Well, regional stability is probably one of the main concerns Washington regarding the region. Thank you very much. Gracias. Obrigado for answering the questions. We're going to have a few questions. We have a few minutes for questions from the panel, from the audience. So please identify yourself, and if you can try to keep the question short, I would really appreciate to get this one.
Me llamo Timoteo, and I speak English, retired U.S. diplomat, served in Brazil, and all around Brazil in Argentina, and twice in Bolivia, twice in Paraguay, and always went to VA in Argentina to get away from those wonderful places. My question, that was absolutely wonderful. My question is, what is, talking about drugs, what is Evo Morales all of a sudden doing, arriving in Buenos Aires, when those of us that thought he was an international criminal and cocaine trafficker crossing the river to Donald Trump's place to sell his stuff and kill our children? What's he doing down there? Is he romancing that Bruja, the former president, now vice president, involved in killing people like Nisman and all that Hezbollah stuff of 20 years ago? Or is he just going to do business with Brazil and be a nice guy? Or is he going to arm these people to re-invade the wonderful country of Bolivia?
So, you know, we're going to take a couple of minutes.
Hi, my name is Talita Pessoa. I'm studying a master's in Georgetown, but I'm also working with the Southern Argentina Authority. I wanted to ask about the future of the WTO, because Trump is rejecting to appoint people, and then if Trump should be reelected, how do you see playing out for Argentina and Brazil and the future of MERCOSUR?
Thank you. Very good panel. Jack Luff, Inspire Farms. My question, Monica, so I'm going to follow on the lead of picking on you on your birthday. You mentioned Brazil and the challenge of what's the path to growth. And I kind of want to just press on that a little bit, because it seems like Brazil hasn't, with the BNDES-led model, it hasn't been able to do that. I'm doubtful that a country of that size can really follow an agribusiness exporter model to development. Which I guess maybe leaves open, is it redirecting supply chains, and is that maybe a reason to focus on the United States? But I understand it's a difficult question, but what do you kind of see as the way that they have to start testing to get kind of serious growth, since it's still in development?
Okay, so we have Evo, WTO. We have one over here.
Yeah, I'm Bob Carolla. I teach at American University journalism and media. I want to add another dimension which may be relevant, maybe not. In U.S. politics, the disruptive force is now social media, as well as cybersecurity. And I'm wondering if that is part of any of the picture of divisions in both Argentina and Brazil.
Media and social media, great question. Right, who wants to start? You can go inside. Okay, yeah.
Thank you for that question, because today is the day that, marks the potential suspension and I don't know what of the WTO appellate body. As you all know, the appellate body is crucial for the functioning of the WTO, because that's where trade cases are taken to, that's where trade disputes are resolved. And without the appellate body, the WTO ceases to be a functioning institution. And so the context right now, without the appellate body, is one where, we are in a global situation where countries, United States, other countries, are facing these rising threats of protectionism and trade wars, without an institution like the WTO, what happened here, to become an arbiter of these sorts of disputes, it's going to be each country for itself. And this leads us to a very dangerous situation where, you know, trade wars might become the common thing, might become the common ground, and where countries are going to be resolving their issues bilaterally, potentially in ways that are highly inefficient, not just for the countries involved, but for the global trading system more generally. So what's happening today with the appellate body of the WTO has, without a doubt, long-term implications for trade, for the state of the global economy, and for specific countries individually, and it's extremely serious. It's hard to exaggerate how serious that problem is. Which ties into your question, this issue of trade, because my response to you is the one, but I think it's by now sort of a missed opportunity, though not completely. What Brazil had kind of proposed to do, and this was still under the Temer administration, it started to delineate some very ambitious plans for opening itself up. So for abandoning the typical protectionist mentality that's been in place forever, and, you know, starting to take certain actions and do certain things to open up the economy. The current government seems to have the same idea, at least as espoused by, you know, the economy minister and his views. But tellingly, the economy minister, the Brazilian economy minister the other day, when asked about trade, when asked about openness more generally, he made a comment where he said, well, you know, trade is opening up the country to trade and investment and all that is really important, but it has to it has to come after the other reforms. And I think that, again, reflects something that has never abandoned Brazil and Argentina. I mean, we spoke of the industrialists in Sao Paulo and in other places. Brazil and Argentina, this is because I've been reviewing this literature, import substitution is in our blood, and we have not let it go. We simply have not let it go. And it's a powerful political discourse to date. It is in the mentality of our industrialists. They're all import substitutors, whether they dub themselves that or not. And that gets in the way of policy, because of course they're a very powerful lobbying group. And when it comes to, you know, talking to people like Guedes, who is a pro-market liberal in the very sort of ultra-orthodox sense of that expression, you can see how that political barrier comes into play. So my response to you would be, you know, under ideal conditions, what could get Brazil out of this quagmire would be openness, but we're not moving in that direction. Thank you.
Let me say something about the social media question. Thanks to the Office of the National Prosecutor in Brazil, we now know a great deal more than we did about how Bolsonaro made it to the presidency. And of course, social media was critical. And I think the picture that emerges now, what we now know, is that the degree to which the Bolsonaro campaign invested in social media targeting and micro-targeting is at a level that it's slightly lower in tech than what we saw with the Cambridge Analytica story. But we also learned that because of the Bolsonaro effect, all the other campaigns now have very little choice but to invest very heavily in stepping up the ante and going beyond what Bolsonaro did last time around. So I know for a fact that lots of people who are now thinking of the next presidential campaign cycle in 2022 are doing is learning lessons mostly from the Macron operation in France and the Modi operation in India. There is, of course, a massive question mark around what's legal and what isn't. And this being Brazil, I can imagine a situation in which these things are not going to get resolved before 2022, hence opening the door to a lot of questioning as to the nature of the elections, which is, of course, yet another element in the basket of how sustainable Brazilian democracy is moving forward. But I think that's That's what we've learned thus far. On the issue of Bolivia, I don't think I agree with your characterization of the story, but what I can tell you is this. Bolivian stability is absolutely crucial for both Brazil and Argentina, partly because of the amount of Argentine and Brazilian citizens living in Bolivia and the other way around, but partly because gas that comes from Bolivia still is a major economic input for both countries, although that looks like it's changing because of developments in the gas industry and oil industry in both countries. But as of now, it's absolutely crucial. And what's so worrying, not of ever coming back to Argentina, but what's so worrying about instability in Bolivia is that unlike what happened in Bolivia in 2008, big crisis, and unlike what happened in Bolivia in 2004 and 1999, now there are no regional institutions in South America that can help dilute the pressures, contain the situation. Back in the day, we had mechanisms. Those mechanisms are now broken, and that's why the lack of good entente, if you want, between Bolsonaro and Fernandez is so worrying.
Voy a contestar la pregunta con respecto a Evo Morales en dos aspectos. El primero es que, pensando que Evo Morales tiene que estar exilado, obviamente para él es mucho más confortable y amigable estar en Argentina que en México. Comparte la cultura, está acostumbrado, hay muchísimos bolivianos en Argentina y es una larga tradición, por lo tanto, para él, fuera de cualquier objetivo político, es mucho más amigable estar entre colegas y compatriotas. Desde el otro punto de vista, digo, me parece que hay también una calificación un poco errónea, porque ahora está el presidente de Cuba en Argentina en la asunción de Alberto Fernández. Interpretarlo como un rasgo de alianza preferencial con lo que podríamos llamar la izquierda o la izquierda rosa, como lo quieran llamar, me parece es un error, porque hay que recordar que Alfonsín también recibió en su asunción al presidente de Cuba, y eso no implicó necesariamente un alineamiento automático con Cuba. Creo que, y ahí me vinculo un poco a lo que estaba diciendo recién Matías, hay una intención de Alberto Fernández de reconstruir la construcción regional. De alguna manera él se ve como un líder que puede unir incluso a gobiernos de signo muy diferente. Y el apoyo a Evo Morales, que incluso el gobierno de Macri consideró una ruptura democrática, no es algo que se salga de esa visión de tener un sistema democrático más fuerte regional y de volver a construir algún tipo de vinculación que permita por lo menos morigerar o tener alguna alternativa para cuando se producen alguna de estas situaciones críticas.
Briefly, on the WTO question, I agree completely with what Monica said, especially for smaller countries. I mean, the law of the jungle, we are the smaller animals, we're going to get eaten. And interestingly, in the case of Argentina, the WTO has been an instrument for us to protect our industries from China, not from the US. We've presented, of course, Argentina has been sued many times because we do that, but we also requested many anti-dumping measures against Chinese products. And without the WTO, we're just at the mercy of, okay, you want this investment project, well then, whatever. You know the drill. And in the case of opening up the future agenda for growth, I guess Argentina also presents an example of the difficulties of implementing that agenda and how socially, politically costly it is, at least at the short term, when the benefits, I mean, of course, it's typical, the losers are very concentrated and you can see them while the potential winnings come in the long term. And also in the sense, for instance, let's say Alberto Fernández can say to Macri, look, the world of Trump is my world. I mean, what you pretended to do, opening up, competitiveness, whatever, that's in the past. I mean, for guys like Trump and Putin and whatever, the protectionist policies of, the typical protectionist policies of Peronism are the way to go. And he kind of has a point, which makes it much harder. And I agree that in the long term, that agenda is needed, but it makes it politically impossible to implement.
Thank you very much. We have time for una pregunta más. Peter. Right here.
Go right back to the beginning. So, let me go back to the beginning. Right from the start, Dia said that Bolsonaro was largely successful. Monica responded, not really. Since his success or failure is going to have a big influence on where Brazil heads over the coming period. So it seems to me that we ought to try and find out which is right, yes or not really. And I just wonder what to look for in the coming 6 months, 8 months, year, that would confirm one or the other.
Let me begin because I don't want to be mischaracterized.
Birthday.
I know. No, but I'm just terrified that he says that I call Bolsonaro successful. Let me establish the terms of what I meant. The question a year ago at the Inter-American Dialogue was, can a candidate who's promising not to do business as usual in Brazil govern? Question mark. And what I said is the answer on year one is yes, he can. I'm not trying to attribute a positive adjective to Bolsonaro. God forbid. I am anti-Bolsonaro to the core, to the bone. So all I'm saying is he's proven that he's managed to govern the place thus far. His approval rates are not dismal. He's managed to pass reform. Now, whether he's heading for a wall, we can debate that. That's what I meant. That's what I meant by success.
That was your birthday gift, Monica.
So now that Matias has saved his skin, and we all understand that he's not a hidden Bolsonarista, because he's not. Let me say a thing or two about your question. So I think the fact that we are already, and when I say we, I say Brazilians and a bunch of people who are, thinking that they might be successful candidates in 2022. The very fact that we're talking about 2022 and 2019 hasn't even ended. 2022 is when the next elections are going to take place. I think is what we need to observe in order to answer your question. And I think by and large, the sense that I have at least is that if we're talking about 2022 now, before the first year is even over, is there really a chance of Bolsonaro continuing as president after 2022? Is that what's going to happen? Because the movements that we're seeing, on the part of Rodrigo Maia and the way that he's playing things and the way that he's, trying to take charge of certain portions of the economic agenda, but the political agenda as well, the way that we're seeing, some portion of whatever, let's call it the liberal progressive center in Brazil, because that's how they denominate themselves now, trying to galvanize around a candidate, the potential candidacy of somebody like Luciano Huck. The fact that we have, other potential people out there who are, vying for the presidency in 2022 is already a sign that many fear that this current model that's in place right now is probably going to degenerate over the next 3 something years that are left.
Now we have something to disagree on. So I see it differently. I see an opposition that is not organized as an opposition. I see a center that calls itself the moderate center in an age of polarization, using the language of moderation, which we know leads nowhere. And the fact is that Bolsonaro has been effective at sticking to his message, very effective. The fact of the matter is that anti-Petty sentiment remains a dominant sentiment politically in the country. And as far as we then find an alternative with an alternative message, and one that can energize the people, and that's not going to be convergence in the center, I could imagine this guy getting reelected. If you remember, 1 year into Trump's administration, a lot of people said, well, of course, he's not going to get reelected. Because how could he?
He also said that Cristina was not going to be back in power.
Exactly. So I'm hesitant until we don't see a challenger with the force to actually defeat Bolsonaro. And I don't think that person is Lula for various reasons. I think we need to very seriously consider that this guy might actually be a very competitive candidate in 2022. And the reason why that's so important is because if we want to unseat him, we need to get our act together now. And I don't see anyone in the opposition moving in that direction yet.
So I'm taking the word back. And the way I see this is, yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. But there's a very important but here. The movement that we might see over the next 3 years may not need necessarily, may not need us to know who the political leadership is going to be right now. Because the way I see things moving along in the next 3 years is, we already have a rise in extreme poverty. We already have the vulnerable middle classes falling back into poverty. We have already seen stagnating social mobility. None of these things are going to change unless this economy starts growing at a pace that is at least 3 times the pace at which it's growing right now. So without any of these things in place, what you will see is likely a movement of people in a disorganized way, because that's how these things usually start, but a movement of people who are going to be very unsatisfied with the way that things are moving. Now let me just add one final thought on Lula, because this is important. So Lula is not the Lula he used to be. Certainly he isn't. Anti-PT sentiment is still very, I agree with all of that. The anti-PT sentiment is still very strong in Brazil. But let's not forget what Lula did as soon as he got out of jail. What did he do? He didn't attack Bolsonaro. He attacked Paulo Guedes and his policies. He attacked the ultra-orthodoxy. He attacked the ultra-liberalism or pro-market liberalism.
Tweeted a video of him in the gym.
He tweeted a video of himself in the gym, and he actually looks younger than when people are going into prison. But anyway, the point is, he serves to, you know, potentially disarticulate this opposition that seemed to have, you know, was beginning to sort of find some kind of footing. He does do that. But on the other hand, he makes this message of, look, if your economic fortunes are going to go downhill, you need something else. He's got that message. I'm not saying he's going to be the guy in 2022, but whomever ends up picking up that message is going to be speaking to popular sentiment at the time.
In relative terms, you know, like, being the fact that, you know, brothers at the southern border are about to go into default again, you know, like growing at 1% seems pretty good from our perspective.
Coming from the future, which is Argentina, I have to agree with Monica in the sense that economic performance is key because, and as Matias was saying, Cristina was done 2 years ago, and now she is the kingmaker. So economic performance is crucial to create the political conditions. And also, I guess, one indicator would be whether Bolsonaro's new party actually happens. If he's able to construct a political machinery of his own, I don't think maybe not, but his attempt to do it, I think will show us whether he's got what it takes to be not just a product of a situation and anti-PT sentiment, but actually build something towards the future.
All right. On that note, thank you very much for this.